Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. How are you doing today? As promised in the daily financial news, we have the one, the only, and yes, the legend, Jonathan Twomley. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, Michael. How are you today?
I'm doing really well, man. I have been thinking about this video, how to articulate it for quite a while. I think you and I have been feeling like the market is getting stretched. We have seen bad deals come across our plate. And frankly, many of those bad deals are still getting done, which scares me. So I have rewound the clock to an earlier time in my investing career just to highlight that, you know what, some of these deals getting done are not locking in gains, but they're actually locking in tremendous losses. So what do you think about that before I bring it up?
Yeah. So, I mean, listen, we talk a lot about the idea that you make your money on the buy, right? And the idea behind that is really what we're talking about today, is that, you know, the cost structure that you lock in on a deal when you buy the deal, right, is going to follow you for the rest of the time that you own the deal, right? So if you overpay, you can never correct that problem, right?
Exactly.
You can, you know, well, and what people I think are hoping is, well, we're going to get so much rent growth that we will grow our way out of the problem. It's sort of like, it reminds me of the way that like the federal government keeps on saying like, oh, we're going to grow our way out of the federal budget deficit like, by piling more tax cuts and more stimulus on this. And, you know, we're going to make the budget deficit so big that we'll grow our way out of it, right? And it's this circular thinking where people say, hey, I'm going to overpay for this deal, but it's going to, you know, but we're going to grow our rent so much and we're going to cut our expenses so much, which you can't, you can never cut expenses on properties.
Yeah.
You know,
they don't just magically heal themselves.
Yeah. That like you will solve the problem of overpaying.
Yeah.
And you can't do that. You lock in that cost structure when you buy, and either you are locking in a good cost structure or you're locking a bad one. And I can look at the deals I did. It's very simple. The ones that like made really great money, we somehow managed to underpay for those deals. Like in retrospect, you don't necessarily know you're doing it at the time, but we definitely in retrospect knew like, wow, we actually got this for a steal. And the ones that didn't perform so well were the ones we thought we were getting for a steal, but in retrospect, we're like, you know what? We actually overpaid for this property given X, Y, and Z, right? Yeah. So that was the determining factor right there. It wasn't about rent growth. We had the same rent growth on all the properties because they were in the same market. You know, we had the same occupancy in all the properties. The end of the day was like, what was the cost structure you locked in, given how much, which is a function of the price you pay and the amount of debt you have on the property.
Yeah, I just want people to realize, and again, to me, this is multifamily, just generally speaking, right? I'm not picking any markets, I'm talking nationally, are very much like what you are about to see in 2006 or 7. So what I'm going to do here, folks, I'm going to bring up Zillow, which actually is going to show you the price history for the first unit or first house I bought. I talk about it in my book. But what I want to talk about here is, again, the person who bought it from me, I knew they bought a bad deal. It was negative cash flow. It had to be. But they didn't actually feel the pain for years. So what I'm trying to get people to realize is, yeah, you may be feeling really cocky and good about signing that deal today in your multifamily space, but you are about to lose your ass. And I want this real world example, and I have dozens of these that I could show. But let me bring it up, and let's just see if this hits home with anybody. There it is. So let me collapse you and I. So Jonathan, can you see this now?
Okay, hold on. Yes, I can see it. Okay.
All right. So this is the first house I ever bought in Fresno. It's 1818 Norris Drive East, 93703. So folks, you can go look this up. This is not, you know, Photoshop or anything. But what I want to call your attention to is down at near the bottom, 12/11/2002. That was my purchase. 107 grand, rented for 1,100. I put 20% down, cash flowed 150, 175 bucks, right? That was the 1% rule, you know, way back when in 2002. Fast forward, not even 3 years to 2005, I sold it for 264. Jonathan, guess what the rent was? Was it the same or more than what I got it for 3 years earlier?
The rent that you were
Yep.
collecting?
The rent that I was collecting in 2002 was 1,100. Guess what it was in 2005?
1,200.
1,100. It didn't
Wow.
move a nickel. So
did you try to raise rents?
We couldn't at that time because everybody and their brother was getting homes. Yeah.
Was buying homes. Yeah.
Exactly.
I remember that. I remember that as a renter in New York. Same thing. I was like, people were giving away apartments, not giving away, but they were giving away 2-3 months of free rent because everybody was buying houses.
Yeah. So this is what's important. I want people to see this here. The person who bought the deal in 2005 for me bought a bad deal. I call it negative cash flow. I call it an alligator, call it whatever you want. But they felt great in 2005. Right? You don't buy a deal unless you feel great, right? You enjoy it. You probably go out to dinner with your wife or husband, or you celebrate it somehow. And oh, by the way, that person who bought it me from in 2005 probably felt pretty good for 9, maybe even 12 months, because that house appreciates all the way to 300 grand before it reverses course. Then
when did the crash hit you?
Well, it started hitting Fresno in late 2007, got going in 2008, and you will see that this house forecloses and retrades in 2009 at 75 grand.
Yeah, and the only reason that they would foreclose is because they couldn't because that rent was less than what they were paying on the mortgage, right?
Their mortgage was like $1,900, and the rent was $1,100.
They could have written it out. Now this reminds me very much of some conversations I was having with folks in New York City right around 2006, right? And the crash actually hit us. It hit New York. It was one of the last markets to get hit. It actually didn't start crashing until 2008. And I remember talking, and I was getting very interested in real estate investing at the time. It was kind of, as was everybody, because it was all around us, but I'd always been interested in it. But I obviously was thinking more, and I was looking to buy my own house and whatever. So this was on my mind. And I remember talking to one of my colleagues, and she said, my husband and I own an investment condo in the city. And I was like, I said, oh, that's really cool. How much money did you guys make on it every month? And she said, oh, we don't make money on it. But when we sell it, we're going to make our money back.
So they were
literally paying money out of their pocket every month to, they looked at it as like, oh, well, our mortgage is $1,900 and we're getting subsidized $1,100 by this renter. That's how they saw it, right? So they didn't think of it as losing $800 a month. They thought of it as like, someone else is paying $1,100 a month every month. That's great. They're paying part of our mortgage for us. But it all depended on making their money back on the back end, which they were convinced that they would. Now, fortunately, in their case, they were lawyers. They did well. They probably were able to keep on paying that mortgage through the crash, and then let it ride back up. Even more crazy on the rebound in New York City after that. So they may well have done okay, right? But I'm guessing that since obviously this property went into foreclosure,
it did.
This was not someone who had the deep pockets to be able to eat that $800 a month loss every single month, right? And once the crash happened, they just walked away from it because they just were like, well, look, this is worth less than we paid for it.
There were plenty of people that could have held on that didn't, because strategic default became the word of the day, at least in California, because they don't come after you. So again, this is what I'm really bringing up here is a couple of things. I feel in every fiber of my body, some of the deals being done today are very much like the person who bought on November 4th, 2005. You have locked in a bad deal.
Yeah.
And the pain ahead is going to be monstrous. Look at that drop.
Yeah.
That's 70%. That's crazy.
So you wanted to bring this around to the multifamily context, right?
Yep.
And
correct.
Now there are a lot of people who are out there saying that there was no crash in multifamily in the last financial crisis. This is absolutely incorrect. There was a crash. It just wasn't, nobody was really focusing on it because at that time you didn't have all these retail investors buying syndications, right? I mean, you did have some high net worth people in these club deals, right?
Yeah, but it was a sliver.
Yeah, but there was absolutely some of the same kind of like uh, loose lending that went on for multifamily back in those days. Banks were throwing money into everything, and the crash hit multifamily too. Now it hit harder in some places than in others, right? Mm-hmm. But I can tell you, for instance, like in Greenville, South Carolina, where I was investing, and I came in right after this happened, I was not able to borrow money from a local bank in Greenville because they had decided they were not lending to anybody who did not live in the state of South Carolina anymore.
Yeah.
And the reason for that was because they got burned by out-of-state investors who borrowed a ton of money and then just walked away from these projects when they were, halfway through their rehab or whatever, and they just were like,
I'm out.
Just walked, and here are the keys. And so no more lending to out-of-staters after that period.
Yeah,
and
it's going to happen again.
I saw the same groups every deal I looked at. The same groups were in the chain of title, and the story was always, bought really high, foreclosed. Some rehabber bought it for a song, rehabbed it, and then I was looking at it as a rehab deal, as a as a newly renovated deal that I was going to buy for a buy and hold, and you just saw the same names over and over and over again that had walked away from those deals. Yeah. So it absolutely, multifamily is not immune from this.
Not at all. I added the other thing I want to point out here, because again, in my market, I added a bunch of houses in the crash, but I actually added more units in multifamily. There was a delay, right? Because when housing goes bad, it's one unit. But when multifamily goes bad, you typically limp through with 50 or 60% paying or whatever it is. So you could hold out longer. So I was buying crazy housing deals in like 09, 10. I wasn't getting crazy apartment deals till like 11 or 12. Mm-hmm. And I mean, some of the multifamily deals I did are like stealing. They were so good. So again, folks, the idea that everybody likes to talk about, you make your money when you buy. A lot of you that are doing deals today are locking in horrible losses, like that person who overpaid for my house, $264, renting for $1,100. You just don't know it yet. You just don't know it yet. You're going to bleed and bleed and bleed and bleed and then give up.
Yeah. The issue is for multifamily, if you're not locking in a big enough margin of safety, right? And when you look at a cap rate, right, people usually look at a cap rate in terms of as some sort of measure of risk, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But cap rate compression, which we've had now for more than 10 years, and we're down to record low cap rates. Cap rate compression happens because people perceive, supposedly, if the market is functioning properly, it is a result of the risk of the deal going down.
Yep.
Right. Mm-hmm. The cap rate compresses because the deal is less risky. That's not the only reason, though, right? The cap rate can compress because so many people think that it's not risky that they bid the cap rate down to the point where it becomes risky, right? This is the problem of like following the crowd. People can take a good investment and make it a bad investment if enough people follow the crowd into that investment, right? And the perception, and I think we've talked about this before, maybe last week, the perception of safety is inverse to the reality of safety. So the more safe that more people think it is, the less safe it gets. And the opposite is true. When the mass market thinks it's risky, that is the best time to buy because the risk is lowest. Because
amen to that. I saw that close up.
Yeah, because it's been de-risked already, right? You don't have a crash after a crash. You might have an extended period of the doldrums, right?
Yeah, sure.
But where nothing really happens and you don't get appreciation or rent growth. But you're not going to get another crash after the big one happens, right? Yeah. But the thing is, because of recency bias, which is one of the cognitive biases that investors struggle with, after a crash, the crash is recent and it's big, and they think that it's going to happen again. The opposite is happening now. there hasn't been a crash for a long time. People are making money. The market continues to climb. It continues to climb. Recency bias leads people to believe that this will go on forever, right? And that is actually what makes the market more and more risky. And when you come back to the cap rate discussion, the way that I think about cap rates is different. I don't look at a cap rate and say, oh, this is, a low cap rate, therefore it is less risky. I look at a low cap rate and say, all of the margin of safety has been bid out of this deal. The cap rate is representative of your margin of safety, right? You have twice the margin of safety at an 8 cap that you do at a 4 cap, right? Yeah. So, and it used to be the case that, you're like a Class A new build property in New York or San Francisco that was renting to lawyers and doctors and stockbrokers and stuff, that would trade at a 4 cap because those people were going to pay their rent. And even if they lost their jobs, they're going to pay their rent. And even if they all lost their jobs at the same time, they were all going to continue to pay their rent for quite some time after that, right? Because A, they had the money, B, these are people who care about their credit rating, et cetera, right? The flip side was a C deal where you had people who don't make much money, don't have much savings, and their credit is already bad.
Yeah,
and they, frankly, even if they care, they're not in a position, it doesn't matter. Like they may care very much about their credit, but if they don't have the money, they can't pay you rent, right? Yeah. So it would trade at a much higher cap rate, right? To make up for that risk. What you have now is the C deals trading at even lower cap rates than the A deals because people think, well, I'm going to go do a value add and increase the rents and bring in new tenants and they're going to pay me more rent. And then that's how I'm going to increase the cap rate and everything's going to be fine. The problem is, if that doesn't happen, right? Or if they maybe they get higher rents, but the credit quality of the tenants is not any better, right? Or it's marginally better. Yeah. But they're not like really moving up the credit chain with tenants. This basically is all a hope and a prayer. And the thing is, you just don't know how long the music is going to keep on playing, right? It becomes a game of musical chairs. Yes. And it all depends on this continuing to go. And maybe you'll be lucky. And a lot of people will. A lot of people will be just fine. They will ride this out. And then what will happen is after the crash, they'll go out talking about how, oh, you don't have to worry about anything. I was fine. I heard this all the time. Oh, in the crash, I was fine. Well, yeah, you may well have been fine in the crash, but that doesn't mean that everybody was fine in the crash. And the people who you could well have gotten unlucky, you had good timing. And that's all it was. It was just luck. Yeah. If you overpaid and you don't lose your shirt, it's because you got lucky. Yeah. So, that's the way it works. Yeah. What
hopefully people take from this, and again, these are my words, not yours. If you want to agree, disagree, it's totally fine. But what I want to tell people is I think there's a multifamily crash coming. I think people are overpaying today for bad deals. And I know how good it feels. I was there. I saw the guy who bought my place for $264 and how thrilled he was to buy that place. But you make your money when you buy, you also lose, you lock in your losses when you buy. And I see a lot of pain. And again, the pain's not today. The pain's not even tomorrow. In multifamily, pain can stretch for years, but there will be pain and it's not going to be pretty.
You won't know for a while. Although, listen, I'm going to like slightly dispute what you say. If the time horizon is long enough, you can grow your way out of this problem. Well, if you have enough time. So it's all about the time, right?
That's fair.
It's all about, because that, that guy who bought from you, if the run up had gone on 3 more years and he had sold before it happened, right? Yeah, he could have solved his problem. So it all depends on timing. Like if you have enough time to grow the rents and grow yourself into a higher cap rate before you have to refinance or before the crash comes, you're fine. The issue is for people. Now, I'll tell you where the risk is right now. Okay. There are a lot of people buying deals right now with non-traditional financing. Yep. Because they can't get traditional financing because the banks won't give it to them because the deals don't pencil, or because they're doing a big rehab. The deals are not stabilized, right? The traditional banks won't lend on them. These people are buying deals with short-term, high interest.
That's exactly what happened in this deal. The person who bought this had one of those BS 2 and 28s where the first 2 years were ridiculously low rates. Then it reset. The other thing I want to point out, if your time horizon's long enough, you could win, right? He buys in 05. It finally in 2021 got to above that number. If your time horizon's long enough and you can hold, but the key is positive cash flow. You can't hold.
Yes.
Well, most people can't hold for 16 years.
Right. And I'm glad you brought that point up, because with multifamily too, this is what I was talking about with the margin of safety, right? If you are buying at a 5 cap, but you're buying at a 5 cap with tenants that you know are going to pay, right? Mm-hmm. No matter what. And you're buying at a 5 cap in a market with like New York historically, except for recently, but it will be there again soon, mm-hmm. with extremely low vacancy, right? Because there's severe undersupply, mm-hmm. right? If you're buying in a market like that with those kinds of sort of demographics, then that low cap rate is probably reflective of the risk that you're taking, right? But the problem is, if you're buying a B deal or a C deal at what used to be an A cap rate, right? Now you are just a few tenants not paying away from defaulting on your debt, right? And that's the problem, right? The problem is not so much that cap rates are going to decompress and the value is going to go down, because it does throughout the cycle, right? In a normal cycle, it's going to decompress and it's going to compress and decompress again. That's normal. If you have long-term debt and you have cash flowing, and your deals are cash flowing, you'll be fine as long as you don't have to finance, right, at a bad time. The problem though is, if the economy slips into recession, or if something happens in your market where a major employer goes belly up, or whatever mm-hmm. the case, or a lot of supply that comes into your market all of a sudden, and you can't compete for tenants, right? Anything that happens to your rent roll when you're buying at a low cap rate, that's where your risk is, right? Yep. So you've destroyed that 8% or 10% margin of safety that you used to have, that people used to require on a C deal, mm-hmm. right? Gotten rid of that because everybody's like, oh, multifamily can't fail. Multifamily
value add.
Yeah, it can never go down. Rents are always going to go up. People always need a place to live. All these things, we've heard them all before, and it happened in 2008, and it could happen again to you. Oh, and I mean, the other thing too, I wanted to point out about the Greenville example, in the great financial crisis, right? What do you think unemployment went to? What do you think vacancy went to on a market-wide basis in Greenville, which is a really great market?
Oh, vacancy? Yeah. I don't know, 5%, 8%? 12? I have no idea.
17%.
Oh, Jesus. Ouch. Yeah, you don't model that generally.
Yeah. And so
ouch.
17% at the worst point of the crisis. So and you won't see this now, because if you go and download like a Reese report or something like that, they only go back 5 years.
Yeah, they don't go back far enough. Yeah.
When I was looking in 2013, it went back 5 years to 2008. When it, but now you won't see that data, right?
Yeah,
so
it's amazing.
You don't know how low it can get. Now, maybe the market has changed, right? There's been a lot of population growth, but there was a lot of population growth then too. It really depends on, it's a very heavily manufacturing dependent state, right? If we get into a global recession where the manufacturing stops, then, oh boy, it's going to be tough, right? So,
yeah. In the end, I wanted to bring this up because I see so many similarities, right? First and foremost, the person who bought my deal locked in his losses. Second thing that's very similar is he didn't use 30-year fixed rate debt. He used these teaser non-traditional loans. Again, that's a problem. I see it today. And then the last one, if your time horizon is long enough, it'll come back. I mean, in this case, it's kind of extreme at 16 years, but still, I mean, if you're cash flowing, do you really care what it's worth? Yeah, I don't, not really.
If you don't have to sell or refinance, you don't.
Doesn't matter. Yeah.
And I actually did like about, now it's going on like 8 years. I wrote an article on LinkedIn about this, about how if you're cash flowing, then you really don't care about what the market's doing. Yeah. But and this remains true today, but you have to keep the cash flowing up. So if you're not, you got to be wary of those threats to your cash flow, and you have to model them in. You have to, when you're buying a deal, you have to be, I mean, and this may prevent you from buying deals, right? And this is a reality of the business.
Mm-hmm.
If you're underwriting properly, you may look at it and go, maybe I shouldn't buy the deal. And a lot of people are kind of like underwriting like this because
it's too much cash. There's too much damn cash, and you're not comfortable sitting on it, folks. There are lots of bad deals being done today, and you won't even feel the pain for several years. So, it's hopefully that hits home. Go back and look at that picture. Put yourself in the position of that guy buying that stupid house for $264 with $1,100 rent. It could not work out. Couldn't work out. There's no math. You couldn't beat your Excel spreadsheet up enough to make it work. So,
I mean, and similarly, put yourself in the position with a guy buying the multifamily rehab deal in Greenville at the top of the market, and then vacancy went to 17%.
It's right? bad. And again, you won't feel it for a couple of years, but you are buying financial pain right now. All right, we kicked that one. So thank you very much, Jonathan.
Absolutely.